They just signed a $20 million debt contract, Nicholas Vandenberg said, pushing the thick stack of paper across the mahogany table. Say yes, and tomorrow we completely bankrupt them. The edge of the document felt freezing against my fingertips. This private hotel conference room smelled sharply of burnt coffee, and the dry hum of the air conditioner rattled the wet, mid-October maple leaves stuck to the outside glass. I stared at the final page. There were 3 signatures at the bottom. The first belonged to my husband, Tyler. The second belonged to Chelsea, the elegant woman who was supposed to be our financial consultant. The third signature was mine. A heavy, ticking sound echoed from the wall clock. My jaw tightened until my teeth actually ached, and my mouth went completely dry. Right above my forged name was a clause pledging my $3,200,000 personal investment account as the final capital contribution for a corporate acquisition. That was money I had saved from selling my apartment before the wedding. It was money my mother had left me when she died. I did not sign this, I said. Nicholas watched my face. He did not offer any empty pity. My compliance team flagged an approval email that traced back to my wife's personal device, so they placed a temporary hold on the escrow account. The billionaire leaned back in his leather chair. I came here myself because the woman executing this fraud happens to be my wife. Before I let my legal department tear this deal apart, I needed to look at you. I had to know if Amanda Pierce, the 34-year-old operations director of Pierce Weddings, was a victim in this, or a silent partner. The betrayal tasted like copper in the back of my throat. Tyler and his mother, Evelyn, had spent 10 years treating me like an unpaid assistant, even though I ran every single venue they owned. Just this afternoon, when the electronic lock on the main ballroom malfunctioned before a massive autumn reception, I had used my master brass key to force the heavy doors open and save the event. Evelyn had stepped out of the shadows, her eyes cold and calculating. "You hold that key because I allow it," she had whispered. Now, her son was trying to steal my entire future. "The funds have not left your account yet," Nicholas continued, "but the acquisition facility closed late this afternoon. My fund released the first $16,800,000 directly to the seller of Lake Briar Lodge. Your $3,200,000 was falsely listed as the borrower equity contribution due by 10 tomorrow morning. Once that transfer cleared, the remaining working capital reserve would be released." He checked his watch. "If you sign an affidavit confirming the forgery, we can stop the transfer from your account, freeze the remaining loan reserve, and declare a fraud default on the money already advanced. That is why we have to move now." I picked up the heavy pen, then stopped. I had built the daily operations at Pierce Weddings from the ground up. I knew the collateral damage this sudden collapse would cause to innocent people. "Before I sign anything," I told him, keeping my voice steady, "you agree to 3 conditions in writing. You protect my employees from an immediate shutdown, you secure all the client deposits for the upcoming weddings, and you hand over every piece of evidence your forensic team found to my divorce lawyer." Nicholas narrowed his dark eyes. He clearly was not used to people negotiating from a disadvantage. But he finally gave a single, firm nod. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my real name on the affidavit. Just as I lifted the tip, my phone buzzed on the table. The caller ID showed Tyler. I answered the call. "Hey, beautiful," my husband said, his voice dripping with an easy artificial sweetness. "The bank is doing a late system update on our portfolios. Could you read me the 6-digit code they just texted you?" A message flashed across my screen. It was a security alert, asking to approve a new device for my separate investment account. I stared at the glowing text. "Where are you right now?" I asked. "Just wrapping up at the office," Tyler lied smoothly. "I am completely alone." Through the receiver, beneath the sound of his breathing, I heard the distinct pop of a champagne cork. Then came a familiar, elegant laugh. Chelsea's laugh. I looked at Nicholas, pressed the speaker button, and said, "Tell Chelsea," I said, "congratulations." Dead silence followed my congratulations on the speakerphone. For 3 agonizing seconds, only the faint static of the cellular connection filled the hotel conference room. Tyler finally let out a nervous, breathless laugh. He scrambled to find his usual charming tone, explaining that their financial consultant had just dropped by the office with a bottle of champagne to celebrate the upcoming acquisition. His voice sounded thin, and the pitch was entirely wrong. I forced my vocal cords to relax, projecting the exact image of a clueless wife. I told him the security code had already expired, adding that my phone battery was about to die. Then I ended the call. That was the first time I consciously lied to the man I had married, and I knew it would not be the last. Nicholas did not waste a single moment. He immediately patched my divorce attorney and the bank fraud department into a secure line, and we systematically locked down my entire financial life. The bank representative changed every password, blocked all unrecognized devices, and placed a hard fraud alert on the portfolio. The security logs revealed 3 failed login attempts within the last hour. The requests carried the same device fingerprint and internet address previously used when Chelsea accessed company systems from her private residence. My $3,200,000 remained perfectly safe. The billionaire sitting across from me picked up his own phone. He instructed his legal team to block every remaining draw under the loan facility and issue a formal notice of suspected fraud. Nicholas looked up from the screen, his expression completely detached. "This is not a bankruptcy order," he said. "The first acquisition advance has already been funded, so the debt is real, but the remaining reserve is frozen. If your affidavit confirms that they fabricated the equity contribution, the Bad Act provisions make Tyler and Chelsea personally responsible for the funded balance. They also allow us to move against every property Evelyn pledged as collateral." My savings were safe. Their debt was not. I left the hotel and drove straight to Pierce's house. The mid-October wind carried a bitter chill, scattering dry orange leaves across the manicured lawns. A victory celebration was already underway on the back patio. Waiters circulated with silver trays holding crystal champagne flutes, while Evelyn stood at the center of the crowd wearing a pristine ivory suit. She proudly introduced Chelsea to our senior events staff, calling her a visionary strategic partner. When my mother-in-law spotted me standing near the edge of the stone terrace, her smile turned brittle. She loudly instructed me to go check the delivery schedule for the reception chairs. The woman who ran this family wanted everyone to see me as nothing more than a minor employee. I stayed exactly where I was. A man in a plain gray suit walked through the iron gates. He bypassed the waitstaff, stepping directly up to my husband and the visionary partner. The process server handed thick manila envelopes to both Tyler and Chelsea. Before either of them could open the documents, Evelyn began digging into her designer handbag because her phone was vibrating continuously. I knew exactly who was calling. The bank had started asking questions about her collateral. Tyler lowered the paperwork. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a frightened child. The 3 of them turned in unison to stare at me. Evelyn marched across the patio, grabbed my arm, and pulled me into the main administrative office. She slammed the heavy oak door shut. Her voice was a venomous whisper, accusing me of sabotaging a historic business deal over a petty, jealous misunderstanding. She demanded I surrender my brass master key immediately and leave the property. I kept my hands firmly in my pockets. I told her I would not hand over company property without a formal transition protocol signed by Human Resources. Tyler burst into the room before she could respond. He held up a copy of the emergency court filing Nicholas had just submitted. My husband pointed frantically at the forged consent form attached to the back of the packet, stammering that the signature was absolutely flawless. He could not understand how the legal team was proving it was a fake. Evelyn did not shout. She did not even blink. The matriarch of Pierce Weddings simply adjusted her pearl necklace and looked at her son. "Amanda signed enough documents during her years with this company," she said calmly. "We already had everything we needed." The collateral schedule in the folder Tyler dropped on the desk proved Evelyn had pledged our 2 most profitable venues to secure the loan. She was not merely defending her son. She had gambled the real estate itself. Then she turned to me. "You spent 10 years signing whatever kept this family running," she said. "Do not act surprised that the company kept copies." She had not confessed to the forgery, but the confidence in her voice told me she believed no one would ever make her answer for it. The drive back to the house we had shared for a decade took 30 minutes. Crisp autumn wind hammered against the windshield, and dead leaves piled up along the driveway. When I reached the front porch, the electronic deadbolt blinked red. Tyler had already changed the access code. Instead of breaking a window or shouting into the empty yard, I called my attorney. The legal team quickly arranged a supervised entry, and 2 hours later, a private security guard stood by the door while I packed a single suitcase. We had no children to fight over, so the house was just a cold structure filled with things I no longer wanted. While folding a heavy wool sweater, my gaze caught the thick binder of vendor contracts resting on the mahogany desk. Those pages represented countless nights sleeping on the uncomfortable office sofa, fixing ruined schedules, and rescuing panicked brides when sudden autumn storms wiped out their original plans. My husband always referred to that exhaustion as simply helping the family. The matriarch plastered my successful events across glossy corporate brochures, but she never offered a single share of equity for my labor. My phone vibrated against the wooden bedside table. Lena, the general manager at Pierce House, spoke in a hushed, frantic tone. Evelyn had cornered the department heads in the main ballroom, forcing everyone to sign declarations stating I had zero financial authority within the company. Many employees were terrified of losing their paychecks right before the holidays. I told Lena not to start a war over this. They needed to sign only what they knew was true, but I instructed her to secretly save every email the administration sent. Later that evening, I sat in a faded vinyl booth at a highway diner. Grace, our junior accountant, slid into the opposite seat, her hands trembling around a thick ceramic coffee mug. The young woman confessed that Evelyn had stood directly over her desk, demanding she change the ledger label on my portfolio from separate investment account to family capital. Grace was terrified of being sued and had kept the altered files hidden. I did not pressure her or make empty promises. We simply stood up, left cash on the table, and drove straight to my legal team so Grace could give a protected interview, preserve the original files, and receive independent advice about whistleblower retaliation. Sitting in a sterile law office later that night, I searched my own archived outbox and found a crucial message sent 6 months ago. Evelyn had demanded I use my inheritance to fund the new resort expansion. I had firmly declined in writing. Her recorded reply was a single line, warning that I should never expect ownership. This exchange proved I had explicitly refused to fund the acquisition, completely destroying their narrative of my voluntary participation. While the paralegal printed the correspondence, Lena sent a secure digital transfer. As a manager, she had lawful access to the venue security cameras. The grainy video clip was dated 3 months ago, capturing the hallway outside my office while I was managing an out-of-state wedding. Evelyn appeared on screen, slipping into my empty workspace carrying a portable scanner. 10 minutes later, she walked out with a copy of my passport and a personnel file tucked under her arm. My attorney froze the clearest frame. The footage was not sharp enough to read the writing on the folder, but it clearly showed Evelyn leaving my office with a portable scanner and a restricted personnel file. Grace checked the human resources inventory log. The red identification sticker visible in the video matched the binder containing my signed employment loyalty agreement. Beside the file number, Evelyn had entered 2 words in the internal notes field: signature source. The woman who called me family had cataloged my handwriting like it was another company asset. The conference room table felt like a battlefield. Nicholas Vandenberg sat across from my attorney and me, while rain lashed against the glass, carrying the deep chill of late October. I pushed my legal pad forward and demanded that every piece of digital evidence containing my name, my account, or my signature be copied directly to my counsel. Nicholas steepled his fingers, his expression unreadable, and agreed on one strict condition. We had to maintain total confidentiality to avoid ruining his emergency court filing. Our exchange remained sharp, brief, and completely devoid of warmth. His forensic analyst took the floor next, projecting a simple timeline onto the blank wall. A digital file titled Amanda Consent Draft originated on a laptop registered to Chelsea. Moments later, Tyler uploaded the scanned image of my passport, and Evelyn accessed the document to alter the designated source of funds. Finally, Chelsea renamed the file to Executed Consent and submitted the entire package to the lending fund. The analyst pulled up the forged signature page, and my attorney recognized the layout immediately. It was the final page of a strict employment loyalty agreement I had signed 7 years ago, back when my mother-in-law had offered me an impressive director title instead of actual company equity. Evelyn had simply pulled that original contract from the human resources vault, bridging her past exploitation directly into this current theft. The forensic team had also recovered a deleted cache of emails exchanged between Tyler and Chelsea. My lawyer read the printed transcripts aloud, revealing their plan to change all system passwords, transfer the funds, and file for divorce just before the next quarterly audit. One specific sentence jumped off the page, written by the man I had married. Tyler boasted that I would not have enough money left to hire a competent attorney. My hands gripped the edge of the table, but I refused to look away, instructing my counsel to keep reading. I turned my attention back to the billionaire and asked him directly if he had deliberately let them sign the fraudulent documents to trap his wife. Nicholas slid a printed system log across the table. His internal compliance alert had triggered 17 minutes after the final signature. The first acquisition advance had already been released directly to the seller of Lake Briar Lodge, he said. But your personal funds had not moved, and the remaining loan reserve was still under our control. It had taken his team nearly 3 hours to verify the breach before he called me at the hotel. I accepted that he had not orchestrated the fraud, but I reminded him that those 3 hours could still have cost me everything I owned. Right before the meeting ended, Grace arrived. Our junior accountant looked terrified as she handed over a thin, sealed envelope that Evelyn had explicitly ordered her to destroy. The red ink across the front read Post-Closing Control Agreement, followed by an instruction to never upload the document to the lender. My attorney carefully broke the seal and scanned the contents. The first page confirmed the official capitalization table that the fund had received, granting Tyler 51% ownership, Evelyn 29%, and Chelsea 20%. However, the annexed pages revealed a stack of irrevocable stock transfer powers that Tyler had already pre-signed in the closing documents without seeing this final arrangement. The second page outlined a hidden trigger. Exactly 1 business day after the loan disbursement, 31% of the company would automatically transfer to Evelyn and 20% to Chelsea. My husband would be left with 0 voting control, along with a penalty clause forcing him to repay a massive cash advance if he dared to object. Tyler had betrayed me for a company he was never going to own. I placed the official capitalization table flat against the mahogany desk, right next to the secret side agreement. On the public record submitted to the fund, Tyler held 51% ownership, Evelyn held 29%, and Chelsea held 20%. That structure made my husband look like a legitimate majority owner, giving him plenty of financial justification to sign the massive personal guarantees. But the hidden side agreement, the one deliberately kept from the lenders, activated the transfer documents Tyler had already signed. Exactly 1 business day after the loan disbursement, Evelyn would absorb 31% of his shares, and Chelsea would take the remaining 20%. Tyler would be left with 0 voting control, while Chelsea walked away with a massive consulting fee at closing. Evelyn had convinced her own son that these documents were just standard succession protection required by the bank. She had lied to him, just like she had lied to me. Memories shifted into focus, sharpening into a bitter reality. I remembered the autumn gala 2 years ago. My mother-in-law had intentionally seated Tyler next to Chelsea, praising the consultant's unique understanding of corporate scale. Evelyn had not merely covered up an affair. The matriarch of Pierce Weddings had actively engineered the romance, using her son to seduce a pathway directly into a billionaire's lending fund. Across the room, Nicholas picked up the forged consent forms. His jaw tightened, and he pointed out specific formatting choices and proprietary clauses buried in the fine print. These were internal templates from his own private credit fund, documents Chelsea had only seen while consulting on his previous projects. The billionaire was not raging over a broken heart or a betrayed marriage. He was furious because his wife had weaponized his professional reputation to build her own shell company. We were both fighting to protect the empires we had built. My attorney advised against secretly recording any conversations, warning me about state consent laws. Instead, we crafted a carefully worded email to Tyler. I offered to discuss withdrawing my fraud complaint, but only if he explained exactly who had prepared the false consent forms and provided the complete ownership structure. We needed him to respond in writing or offer a bribe to buy my silence. Tyler took the bait less than an hour later. We met at a crowded corner coffee shop, flanked by our respective legal teams. The smell of roasted espresso beans did nothing to settle my stomach. My husband wore his best tailored suit, projecting an aura of rehearsed sorrow. He reached across the small table, claiming Evelyn only wanted to secure the company's future. Then, his attorney slid a drafted settlement agreement toward me. Tyler proposed that I sign a ratification, a legal document stating I had actually consented to the loan from the very beginning. In exchange, he promised a generous financial payout and absolute secrecy regarding the affair. The proposal itself could not prove fraud in court, but it showed me exactly what they wanted most: a new document that would rewrite the past and erase the forgery. I stepped out of the coffee shop and into the cold October wind. My phone immediately began vibrating with frantic messages from venue managers and confused clients. While I was sitting across from Tyler, Evelyn had circulated an internal corporate memo. The document accused me of embezzling $400,000 in wedding deposits. She attached a fabricated ledger showing transfers to an entity called a P-Event Consulting. Before I could process the accusation, my lawyer's phone rang with an urgent identity theft alert. Someone had used my social security number to register a new corporate tax identification. We immediately conferenced with a regional bank fraud officer. The investigator confirmed that a new business profile listed Amanda P. Pierce as the sole beneficial owner, utilizing the last 4 digits of my social security number. However, the person who had physically walked into the branch presented her real identification and successfully passed the background checks as the authorized signer was Chelsea Vandenberg. They had not only stolen my signature once, they had built an entire company around my stolen identity. My phone rang just as I stepped into my lawyer's office. The caller ID flashed the name of a young woman getting married at Willow Terrace in 3 weeks. When I answered, a frantic and tearful voice begged to know if her $70,000 floral and catering deposit had actually vanished. The internal corporate memo had somehow leaked to our clients. I tightened my grip on the phone, promising her I would secure every single cent, even though I could not reveal the ongoing fraud investigation. The theft was no longer just a corporate dispute. It had a face, a wedding dress, and a panicked family. My attorney spread a stack of retrieved bank onboarding documents across the conference table, piecing the identity theft together. Evelyn had abused her administrative access to our human resources database, pulling my full social security number, date of birth, and home address from old tax forms. Then, Chelsea took over. The consultant used a scanned copy of my driver's license from a corporate rental car file to request a new employer identification number. She filed the paperwork for a P-Event Consulting, listing me as the fake sole member, but the bank required a living person to stand in front of them. Chelsea walked into a regional branch we had used for years, handed over her actual identification, and passed the compliance checks under her real name as the authorized signer. She handed the teller a forged operating agreement and a fake written authorization carrying my duplicated signature. The bank verified Chelsea's identity perfectly, but they swallowed the lie about who actually owned the company. Grace arrived at the law office 30 minutes later. Our junior accountant leaned over the fabricated ledger Evelyn had circulated to the staff, tracing her finger down the printed columns. She pointed out that the transaction codes did not match the client trust account. The document was a manipulated spreadsheet export with swapped labels. Grace pulled up the real transaction histories on her tablet, revealing where the missing $400,000 had actually gone. The real routing numbers led directly to 3 genuine corporate payments. One covered the lease on Chelsea's luxury apartment. Another funded a lavish Caribbean vacation Tyler took last winter while telling me he was attending a networking summit. The final wire was a massive consulting fee paid directly to Chelsea. Later that evening, Lena organized a quiet gathering at a local coffee shop after the venues closed. I walked in expecting angry demands, but our department heads stood gathered around a cluster of pushed-together tables. They were not there to riot. Lena handed my attorney a stack of signed statements from every senior manager. The documents confirmed my strict operational policies, swearing that I explicitly required all client deposits to be firewalled from general operating funds. The people I had worked beside for 10 years refused to believe the embezzlement story. An email notification chimed on my lawyer's laptop as we left the cafe. Tyler had officially sent his settlement draft. The terms were simple and entirely predatory. If I signed the legal ratification confirming I consented to the $20 million loan and dropped my fraud claims, Evelyn would retract the embezzlement accusation. The false ledger was never about sending me to prison. It was a crude lever designed to force my hand and legitimize their stolen empire. I drove to Pierce's house the next morning to formally surrender my corporate access. Evelyn waited in the grand foyer, flanked by 2 security guards, ensuring the remaining venue staff watched my humiliation. She extended an open palm, demanding the brass master key, her voice echoing off the marble floor as she declared I would never step foot on the property again. I did not give her the satisfaction of an argument. I simply placed the heavy brass key onto the reception desk and walked out the front doors into the crisp autumn air. But as we walked toward the parking lot, Lena brushed past my lawyer, secretly slipping a folded piece of paper into his briefcase. It was the final system access log captured right before they locked me out of the network. Sitting in the passenger seat of my car, I unfolded the printout. The timestamp showed that at 2 in the morning, right after receiving the notice of default, Evelyn had logged into the client trust module and granted Chelsea full wire transfer authority. They were no longer trying to steal only my savings. They were reaching for every bride's money too. My dining room table disappeared under a mountain of printed venue schedules, vendor contracts, and client rosters. Grace and Lena sat across from me, their faces illuminated by the harsh glow of a laptop screen as we mapped the collateral damage. The late October wind rattled the window panes, but the real storm was inside the room. We cross-referenced every event booked for the next 3 months, counting deposits, catering obligations, vendor payments, and the number of employees depending on those weekly paychecks. The math revealed a brutal division. Pierce House and Willow Terrace, the 2 venues the family had owned for years, remained strongly profitable. Lake Briar Lodge, purchased only days earlier with the first acquisition advance, was already consuming cash faster than it could generate revenue. Evelyn had pledged the 2 healthy venues to finance one deeply troubled estate. Nicholas Vandenberg offered a brutal solution during our morning conference call. The billionaire stated his private credit fund could simply petition the court to seize the collateral and liquidate all 3 venues. He spoke with absolute financial pragmatism, making it clear his only objective was recovering his investors' money, not managing autumn weddings. I pushed back immediately, reminding him that the florists, the kitchen staff, and the brides had absolutely nothing to do with this fraud. I refused to let his fund crush innocent people just to balance a ledger. My attorney stepped in and proposed a middle ground. We could ask the judge to appoint an independent receiver. A court-appointed official would keep the business open, freeze all of Evelyn's accounts, and evaluate the safe sale of individual assets. Nicholas remained silent for a long moment before finally agreeing, but he attached a massive condition. He would only support the receivership if I provided full testimony under oath and presented a viable plan to secure the missing client deposits. Lena leaned forward, tapping a pen against the profitability reports. Our general manager suggested an employee purchase concept, outlining a strategy where the senior staff could pool a minority equity stake. I could leverage my protected investment funds, negotiate an eventual divorce settlement, and secure a commercial loan from our community bank to bid on the 2 profitable locations. It was a fragile strategy requiring airtight business plans and vendor commitments, but it gave us a fighting chance. My phone vibrated violently against the wood. Tyler was calling. I answered, and my husband's voice cracked, begging me not to go to court. He tried to weaponize our past, whispering that I used to love his family, and warning that Evelyn would lose absolutely everything if I testified. I asked him a very simple question. I wanted to know why he had plotted to drain my accounts so I could not afford a lawyer. Tyler went dead silent, eventually stammering out a pathetic excuse blaming Chelsea for the idea. My husband did not want redemption. He only wanted to be rescued from the consequences of his own theft. The emergency hearing convened early the next morning. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom stood closed, separating me from the judge who would decide the fate of Pierce weddings. If I took the stand, the corporate collapse would become public record, destroying the brand's pristine reputation instantly. If I walked away, Evelyn would finalize the transfer of the client deposits and save her empire using my stolen identity. I stood perfectly still in the courthouse hallway, trapped between Lena's desperate hope for the staff and Nicholas's relentless demand for his capital. My attorney touched my shoulder, asking quietly if I was truly ready to risk the company's survival. I opened the courtroom door and said, "The company can survive. The family controlling it should not." The mahogany panels of the courtroom absorbed the tense silence. Evelyn sat perfectly straight at the defense table wearing the identical tailored ivory suit she normally reserved for our most exclusive bridal galas. Her defense attorney stood up and painted a tragic picture for the judge, claiming that Nicholas Vandenberg and I were simply using a regrettable marital affair to destroy a legacy family business. My husband kept his focus locked on the wooden table, his knuckles entirely white, while Chelsea watched the proceedings with the detached boredom of a hired consultant. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand and focused on the facts. My attorney asked about the $3,200,000 listed on the fraudulent loan documents. I explained that the funds belonged entirely to me, acquired from a property sale and an inheritance long before my marriage. We submitted the email from 6 months ago where I explicitly refused to invest my personal capital into the new expansion. I kept my answers short and clinical, letting the paper trail speak louder than any emotional outburst. Nicholas brought his lead forensic analyst to the stand next. The expert mapped out the exact digital footprint of the fabricated loan package, pointing out how the fake consent files started on Chelsea's laptop before Tyler uploaded my stolen identification. The courtroom monitors displayed the security footage of Evelyn entering my empty office, followed immediately by a side-by-side comparison of my forged signature and the old employment loyalty agreement. Tyler shifted in his heavy leather chair, his jaw dropping slightly as he realized the sheer volume of evidence stacked against them. He could no longer blame everything on his mistress. Grace walked down the center aisle holding a thick file folder. Our junior accountant gripped the edge of the witness stand, her voice trembling slightly, but she did not back down. She testified that Evelyn had stood over her desk and ordered her to alter the financial labels on my private accounts. The opposing counsel aggressively attacked her credibility, demanding to know why she had followed illegal orders. Grace looked directly at the judge and admitted she was terrified of losing her job, adding that she saved the original emails because she knew the matriarch would eventually need a scapegoat. Her raw honesty completely neutralized the defense's attack. A representative from the lending fund stepped forward to explain the financial structure. The first $16,800,000 had already been advanced directly to complete the purchase of Lake Briar Lodge. My supposed $3,200,000 equity contribution was due the following morning, while the remaining working capital reserve was still controlled by the lender. The official capitalization table represented Tyler as the 51% majority owner, giving him an apparent economic reason to sign the principal personal guarantees. But the secret side agreement concealed a post-closing change of control that would strip him of every voting share. Those misrepresentations triggered a fraud default on a funded loan. The bad act provisions converted the outstanding balance into a fully recourse obligation against Tyler and Chelsea and allowed the fund to enforce the collateral Evelyn had pledged. The judge leaned over the bench, issued a strict order forbidding any asset transfers, and officially appointed an independent receiver to take temporary control of Pierce Weddings. My lawyer waited for the courtroom to settle before dropping the final piece of evidence. He placed the official capitalization table directly next to the secret side agreement on the projector. Tyler looked up at the screen. On the official bank documents, my husband held 51% of the company. But the hidden transfer papers dictated that exactly one business day after the money arrived, 31% of his shares would automatically go to Evelyn, and the remaining 20% would transfer to Chelsea. Tyler stared at the math, finally realizing he was never going to be the chief executive. He was only meant to carry the debt. My husband snapped. He turned entirely toward his mother, his voice cracking loudly in the quiet room as he demanded to know why they had stripped his equity. Evelyn adjusted her posture and coldly stated it was standard succession protection because he lacked personal stability. Tyler spun toward the consultant, blurting out that Chelsea had promised to marry him once the deal closed. The elegant woman merely rolled her eyes, telling the court that his romantic delusions were completely irrelevant to a corporate contract. Within 3 minutes, the unified family front shattered into 3 desperate people, incriminating themselves on the public record. The judge struck his gavel, granting the receiver immediate access to the corporate banking portals right there in the courtroom. We had won the morning. We had stopped them from taking my personal savings and frozen their expansion plans. But the court-appointed receiver suddenly looked up from his secure laptop, his face completely pale. He announced that the client trust account was nearly $1 million short. The access logs indicated that a massive wire transfer was initiated at 2:13 in the morning, just hours before this hearing began, using the exact administrative permissions Evelyn had granted to Chelsea. We had stopped them from taking my future, but they had already reached into 117 weddings. The missing $1 million threatened to shutter every venue before noon. The court-appointed receiver pacing the courtroom floor warned that without those operating funds, he had a legal obligation to cancel the upcoming weddings and lock the iron gates immediately. My chest tightened at the thought of those ruined weekends, but Grace was already typing furiously on her tablet. Our junior accountant tracked the overnight transaction codes directly to a new regional bank account. This secondary shell company did not use my stolen identity. Chelsea had walked into the branch and presented her own identification, establishing herself as the authorized signer through a corporate resolution drafted and signed by Evelyn. Because the transfer was so large, a standard fraud alert had paused the wire, keeping the funds safely within the United States. Nicholas could not simply reach into another institution and seize the cash. The billionaire stayed perfectly within his legal boundaries, handing his internal compliance records over to the receiver, who immediately petitioned the judge for an emergency freeze order. While we waited for the paperwork, Chelsea made her move. Her defense attorney approached our table in the courthouse hallway, offering a desperate trade. The consultant was willing to surrender her bank authentication token and forward the explicit email from Evelyn commanding the late-night transfer. In exchange, she wanted Nicholas to drop a portion of his civil claims against her. The billionaire stared at his estranged wife, making absolutely no promises about her liability. I leaned forward and told the attorney that any settlement discussions required the client deposits to be returned first. The crumbling family alliance collapsed completely 10 minutes later. Tyler cornered his mother near the elevator bank, his face flushed with genuine panic. My husband had just read Evelyn's formal defense filing, realizing she intended to use the personal instability clause from their secret agreement to blame him for the entire fraud. Tyler walked straight over to the receiver and handed over his unlocked phone. A text message from Evelyn glowed brightly on the screen. It read, "Amanda gave 10 years. Her money is the final contribution." The freeze order cleared shortly after lunch, returning the vast majority of the client funds to the receiver's secure trust. Lena and I spent the next hour calling brides, assuring them that their autumn weddings would proceed exactly as planned. Back at Pierce House, Evelyn attempted one final, desperate maneuver. The receiver discovered that she had tried to physically remove the administrative hard drives and delete the email servers right after the default notice arrived. She forgot that Lena had installed a secondary cloud backup system last year, and the hallway cameras captured her leaving the building with corporate equipment. That frantic attempt to destroy evidence handed the authorities a clear case for obstruction. With the client funds secured, the receiver did not sell the company overnight. For the next 6 weeks, he kept the venues operating, while appraisers inspected the properties, creditors filed their claims, and prospective buyers reviewed every wedding contract, vendor agreement, and payroll obligation. During that period, I finalized a bid for Pierce House and Willow Terrace. My financing came from a committed community bank loan, my protected investment funds, and a newly formed employee trust. Our offer required us to honor every existing wedding contract, assume the outstanding vendor payments, preserve the client deposits, retain the full staff, and recognize the employees' accrued paid time off. Lake Briar Lodge would be marketed separately because its debt burden and operating losses made it unsuitable for our rescue plan. I finalized my bid for Pierce House and Willow Terrace, backed by a community bank loan and a newly formed employee trust. We promised to honor every single contract and retain the staff. On the final day for qualified bids, an all-cash offer appeared on the receiver's registry. It came from an asset management affiliate connected to Nicholas, and its headline price for Pierce House and Willow Terrace was substantially higher than ours. The corporate name on the filing belonged to an asset management affiliate owned by Nicholas. I walked across the receiver's conference room and asked Nicholas whether the bid was his. He said he did not control the affiliate's daily decisions and would not pressure its managers to withdraw an offer made for the benefit of their investors. For the second time, Nicholas placed a contract between us and waited to see whether I could survive it. I did not beg Nicholas to withdraw the corporate bid. Instead, I gathered my legal team, the community bank loan officer, and Lena, to prepare for the sale hearing. The affiliate's lawyers emphasized their larger cash number, but the receiver examined the full economic value of each proposal, not just the headline price. Their offer required the estate to refund the existing clients, pay the vendor cancellation charges, satisfy employee obligations before closing, and accept several broad conditions that allowed the buyer to walk away after further review. My proposal carried a lower purchase price, but it assumed the wedding contracts, the vendor payables, the protected client deposits, and the employee obligations. Our community bank had issued a binding financing commitment, and the employee trust had already deposited its required funds. We were ready to close without another round of uncertainty. When the affiliate's lawyer questioned my ability to operate the venues, I handed the judge 10 years of financial records, vendor commitment letters, and the employee trust documents. I proved my worth using the exact records Evelyn had once used to claim my success as her own. The receiver concluded that our offer produced the stronger net recovery for the estate and the greatest certainty of closing. The judge agreed. The court approved the sale of Pierce House and Willow Terrace to my new holding company. Lake Briar Lodge was sold separately to a commercial buyer, and those proceeds were applied to the funded acquisition debt. Nicholas recovered the vast majority of the outstanding principal, while his fund absorbed the legal, receivership, and administrative costs caused by its compliance failure. He did not give me an empire. I bought the part worth saving, backed by the people who had actually kept it alive. Over the next few months, the legal system dismantled the family legacy piece by piece. Tyler pleaded guilty to reduced fraud charges in exchange for his full cooperation. He lost the marital house, forfeited every corporate right, and accepted substantial restitution. His plea agreement and probation conditions prohibited him from controlling business accounts, serving as a corporate financial officer, or signing on behalf of another company. Chelsea lost access to the life Nicholas's wealth had provided. The divorce ended her use of the marital homes, accounts, and corporate privileges. Separately, the civil judgments enforced her personal guarantee, ordered the return of her consulting fees, and placed liens against her individual assets. Her probation conditions and findings of financial dishonesty ended her consulting career. Tyler actually visited her luxury apartment one last time, harboring some pathetic delusion that they could start over together. The former consultant looked at him like he was a stranger, coldly stating she never intended to build a life with a man who had absolutely nothing left. On his way out, Tyler spotted a printed email on her entryway table, a message proving she had only ever viewed his affection as a banking tool. Evelyn faced the hardest fall of all. The woman who had ruled our lives lost her presidency, her collateral venues, and eventually the family mansion to cover the massive financial shortfall. The text messages Tyler handed over, combined with the hidden side agreement and her attempt to destroy the server data, triggered a severe criminal investigation. The matriarch was ultimately destroyed by the very son she had tried to manipulate. By early April, the barren branches around the estate finally sprouted fresh green buds. I stood by the grand entrance of Pierce House before our first spring wedding under the brand new name. The court-appointed receiver walked up the front steps, reached into his pocket, and handed over the heavy brass master key Evelyn had demanded from me 6 months ago. A dark sedan pulled up to the wrought iron security gates. Evelyn stepped out into the crisp spring air, demanding entry to what she still called her family legacy. I walked down the long driveway, stopping just on the other side of the bars. I did not scream or deliver a long speech. I simply looked at the woman who had stolen my labor and tried to steal my future. "You were right," I told her, my voice perfectly steady. "I am not part of your family anymore. I am the owner." I turned my back and signaled the security guard to close the gates. Walking back into the main ballroom, the string quartet began tuning their instruments. A young couple waited near the catering station to sign their final venue contract. I handed them 2 separate copies, advising them quietly to never sign a document that only one person in a marriage was allowed to understand. The heavy wooden doors swung open to welcome the first guest. This time, when I locked the doors of Pierce House, no one had given me permission to hold the key. I learned that loyalty is not permission. Love does not replace independent advice, and family pressure does not make a forged signature legal. Protect the money you brought into a marriage. Read every document. Keep your own records. Never let anyone convince you that financial boundaries are a betrayal. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself? Share your story in the comments. Someone listening may need the courage you found.